Welcome to the Underground Paradox, the UGP, and the search for truth with me, G. Redfords. I have been gone for so long, and for that I am sorry, guys. Unfortunately, life in the last year just threw some challenges at me, and I had to make some priorities. Unfortunately, I didn't have time for YouTube content. But the good news is that everything is starting to get settled, and I am starting to get back to creating content, both here on the Underground Paradox and on my other YouTube channel, The Vault. Before I go any further, I want to take a moment to say a big thank you to everyone that has stayed with the channel and continued supporting. It means so much to me, and as I said, the good news is that I'm back to making content. Here on the Underground Paradox, it's all about the search for truth, the unexplained archaeology, unexplained ufology, unexplained cryptids, investigating on location, primarily here in Devon and Cornwall on Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor, but also in other areas of the UK. I'm also creating content for my other show, G-Star Vault, on my other YouTube channel, The Vault. G-Star Vault, the safe place for paranormal evidence, once again is all about investigating, but more so analysing paranormal content, from ufology to cryptids, and through to the supernatural and just thought-provoking subjects. So if you haven't checked out The Vault yet, I'll put a link in the description. Please subscribe. On that note, I recently did a collaboration between G-Star Vault and the Underground Paradox and released that episode, and I'm actually going to release it on this channel as well, and that's going to be the next episode. 50% of that episode is me out on location in Devon investigating a ufology sighting, and it's actually a sighting from myself, so you're not going to want to miss that one. So that's coming up next on UGP. The episode after that is going to be some footage where I was out in two different locations with two different sets of people filming on location, investigating. That was footage that I filmed last year before I had to stop uploading content. One location is a very, very creepy location near Buckfastleigh, where I was out with Kevin Hines, paranormal investigator, and one other member of the Black Crow Paranormal Society. And then there was another location where I was investigating with the guy Stephen Ryan from the Unexplained Files UK, and that was really interesting as well. So that'll be featured in the episode after that. And whilst you guys are watching all of that, I'm going to be getting out on location with Monty from the Monty Zone, which is on another program on The Vault, and he will hopefully be joining me, where we're going to be going to a abandoned airfield, military airfield, but I won't tell you exactly where that is just yet. So loads to look forward to coming here on the UGP. But for this episode, I thought I would share with you an interview that I did just over a year ago, where I was lucky to sit down with a gentleman by the name of Andy McGrath, who is the author of the Beasts of Britain book series, and also the Beasts of the World. And he's the guy that the press will go to here in the UK if they've got a story about a monster or a cryptid and they want a professional opinion. He's an international podcaster, and I was so lucky to get to sit down with him as part of the Vault sessions. So I thought I'd share it with you, because I know that you guys here on the UGP will also love to hear all this interesting stuff about monsters and cryptids. But the conversation goes through all the way through the supernatural into ufology. So enjoy this interview, get comfortable, get a drink, and I'll see you next time on the UGP. Welcome along to the Vault sessions, Andy McGrath. I'm just going to unmute you there, Andy.
Oh, great. Hi, G. How you doing? Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing really, really well, and I am super, super happy to be meeting you. It's going to be absolutely brilliant to get to know you a little bit better and what you've been doing in your field, and just some of the interesting stuff that you've got to share. Um,
Sure.
Again, I'm just going to go straight into some questions that I've got that I'm burning to ask you. When and why did you become interested in cryptids and monsters?
It started as a teenager. I can't remember the exact time, but it was an early teenager, and I was watching reruns of things like the things I'd seen as a child, like the In Search of series with Leonard Nimoy, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, that had great stuff about crystal skulls and Ogopogo and other creatures like the Sasquatch. I just got interested. I thought, wow, is there a possibility that there are some animals out there still left to find? And as the years went on, I would collect newspaper clippings, and then later, as the internet came in, get involved in forums and chat rooms and all that stuff that people used to do, talking about sightings that people had had. I became really, really enamored with it. I thought, wow, people are actually coming on here, sometimes very genuinely, sometimes not, and claiming to see these things in the modern day. We're not just talking about folklore, old dragon lore from the medieval times. We're talking about
Yeah,
people in the modern day who think they've seen something they can't explain. And many of the things that they were describing in my area, in cryptozoology, seemed to be animals that we didn't know about yet or we hadn't classified. And I thought, well, what if that could be real? And it was always a passing interest. I was a musician in my past life, and this thing happened in the background. And then I got married, came to London, had a family, worked 50-hour weeks in the city
mm,
for years and years with a 3-hour, daily round trip commute. And when I turned 40, which is in 2016, my wife, we just saved a little money, from having no lives and working constantly. And she said, "Why don't we do like our pet projects or something? Just take a few years off, or maybe a year was the plan." And I said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And she did her thing, and um, she said to me, "Well, what about this monsters thing you're always talking about? Your monsters." I was like, "Okay, I guess I could do something like that." And then initially, I had planned to make it a TV series. But a friend of mine who was in TV said, "Well, look, you don't really have any experience here, and if you just forward this idea to some execs, if it's a good idea, they're just going to steal it. Why don't you write a book? And then at least the concept, the name, all of that stuff is yours, and it's very hard to just take that thing from you." And I'd never written a book, but I used to be a lyricist and a songwriter, so I thought, well, just use some of those skills. And I wrote a book and I called it Beasts of Britain. But even before the
mm-hmm.
book was done, I immediately, right from the start, started blogging it, chapters of it, and also interviewing right away. Some American podcaster got in touch and said, "Will you talk about the British Bigfoot?" And I said, "Okay, fine." And it just spiraled. So for the first year, sort of late 2016 to mid 2017, when the book came out, the first version, I was blogging it and also interviewing. I must have done about 50 interviews about the book before it even happened and it arrived. And it just kind of spiraled from there. I'm on my third version sorry, shameless plug, Beasts of Britain, third and final version.
Mm-hmm.
And also my,
Yeah, great.
sorry, once again, Beasts of the World. That's a new 7-part series I've just started. And yeah, I'm talking, I'm speaking, I'm currently pitching a TV series where the producer of Monster Quest, Doug Fleischek,
Wow.
we're working together. We've not sold it yet, but we're in the meetings. We're pushing hard, and we think we might be able to get it done. So if we do get it done, we'll have a cryptid series that's international, that goes around the world to look at cryptids you've never heard of, researchers nobody knows about, stuck without praise, without reward, in
Mhm.
some jungle somewhere, looking at some odd creature nobody's ever been interested in because it's not Sasquatch or Nessie.
Well, it
And
sounds really exciting, and I just want to say right now that I have some experience in front of the camera. If you need any help, no, I'm just joking. I'm
oh
just
yeah,
joking.
absolutely.
But
No, but
it
we
sounds
do,
really
because
exciting.
yeah, yeah, researchers we all meet researchers all over the world, so it's perfect. Actually, it's something to celebrate the cryptid community and their obsession with their
Yes,
individual
and
cryptids.
definitely it's not as expansive, I would say, here in the UK as it is, maybe in other countries around the world, and especially like the US. So the more we can celebrate it, the better, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've got some really interesting questions already come in,
Oh
even
no,
into the guys that have joined along as well. Hi, Dan. But we had a really interesting question from Healing Heart. I don't know if you can see that on the screen,
I can
Andy.
see that. Yeah.
Well, I'd really like to know whether Bigfoot is physical or paranormal or both.
Now,
So,
one healing heart is happening upon there is actually a tear in the fabric of all Bigfoot researchers. And there's this, I call them two warring camps. They're not warring camps, but there is the flesh and blood camp and what is called or known as the Woo, WOO, the Woo, which is paranormal Bigfoot research. A lot of people, very serious people actually, with scientific backings and people who've otherwise believed in a flesh and blood creature for many many years now have come over to this side where they think it must be a paranormal creature. I was even talking to Wes Jimmer from Sasquatch Chronicles very recently, and he surprised me by saying, and he had a flesh and blood experience with three Sasquatch. That's his big experience that started his journey into this
mhm.
world. And he said that he now believes it could possibly be a paranormal creature, which shocked me because I'm in the flesh and blood camp completely. Now, it's not that I don't believe there isn't a paranormal in life or there isn't some other realm outside of our physicality. I just think, from my perspective, I'm looking for unknown animals. So, had I heard details about the okapi before its discovery in the forests of the Congo, I wouldn't have considered for a moment speculating on whether or not it was immaterial or
Mhm.
a paranormal animal. I'm looking for a creature. That's a creature that looks like a giraffe with a short neck and zebra legs, and two short horns. I'm looking for a creature. And that's the same thing with me with Nessie or Sasquatch and some other things which stray slightly into the I'm not sure if they are or they're not category, and perhaps Black Shuck or something like that, or the Dog Man. Oh, I've got a theory on that. But I'm still in the flesh and blood. And I'd say Healing Heart. Disappointingly for some, I think it's a flesh and blood creature.
Well, that's the thing that it might be disappointing for some, but it's at least an honest answer. I mean, it's very much the same of how I feel, because I think Healing Heart is talking when she mentions paranormal that certainly something that's evolved in the last decade or so is the UFO connection or the alien connection with Bigfoot, and that's something that I've been talking a lot about recently that I'm going to start exploring a little bit more. I haven't thus far. And the reason why I guess I haven't thus far is because there's not a great, well, certainly in the research that I've done, there's not a great deal of evidence, strong evidence that kind of helps support that theory. But that's also, when you think about what we're saying there, how do you find that evidence? Because people are talking about potentially, portals, etc.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
can appear through and disappear into. And how do you quantify a portal? Like, other than capturing it on video footage, it's not something that would be solid. So there's a lot of things around that side of the phenomenon, I guess, that
yeah.
would be very hard to find quantifiable evidence. So, but it is something that I'm process.
No, absolutely. I think although I've got an opinion, or really you could say um, a research philosophy, sort of an angle at which I'm heading towards. I'm trying to find specifically creatures that have not yet been classified by science, or creatures that were thought to have become extinct. For instance, that would cover the Nessie plesiosaur theory, for example, and bring those things to light either through anecdotal reports, physical evidence, or the golden prize, as it were, a specimen or irrefutable video evidence of a flesh and blood creature. That's the kind of thing I'm interested in. But I don't discount the other stuff, because largely in the cryptozoology community, we mostly survive on anecdotal reports. That's the main basis of our evidence. There are other soft evidences like the footprints, of course, and hair and other things that we can find, but it's mostly anecdotal, as is most of the ufology and the paranormal side of things. And even when you've got your ghost hunters wandering through a building there with the EMFs, it's still anecdotal for the most part. We're trusting the person that's telling us the story to tell the truth, and we're taking them seriously and saying, okay, I'll investigate your serious report, as if you've just told me an actual thing that has happened in reality. And that's a difficult thing, and that actually sometimes is the only dividing line between all of those genres, is which one we're willing to take seriously when we get the anecdotal reports. I once said to somebody that one man's dog man is another man's Bigfoot. So for me, the dog man is very hard to quantify as a real flesh and blood creature from a biological perspective. But to some normie I'm talking to Bigfoot about, that sounds really hard to believe in as well. That's quite a stretch. So that's a stretch for them, and dog man is a stretch for me. And yet we're all on the same path, really.
I actually wanted to ask you, Andy, a couple of questions about your books, and but just with what you were just saying there, you've also made a question pop into my mind, which is more relevant to what we were just talking about. So I think I'll throw that one in first. And that question was, do you have you read a lot of the Bigfoot field research organization, the BFRO?
Only in as far as, no, I mean, I've obviously read lots of their reports, and when I've been looking at areas,
that's kind of what I mean.
Yes.
The BFRO isn't just for the States. You can report a sighting of Almasty or the UK wildman if you want to, but for those of you out there who do believe in more of the paranormal or have had experiences, I would really urge and encourage you to go and leave an official report, because it would start helping more to the evidence and research, I guess, right, Andy?
I think so as well. And what you just asked there actually really brought up a question that's always in my mind about perspective and philosophy, and that is our outlook on life. So, in the Western world at the moment, we're sort of in the situation where we have this religious void in our lives now, because that was a big part of all of our ancestors' lives until very, very recently. And that's been removed, but there's nothing that's really replaced it. So we all tend to replace it with an interest or a passion, maybe a religion as well, but also mostly a passion or an interest. And our philosophy on life often plays out within that passion and interest. So sometimes these perspectives on, is Bigfoot something paranormal? Is Bigfoot something flesh and blood? Is Bigfoot something to do with aliens? When we've not experienced it ourselves and not had those direct experiences, I think can often fall into those categories of, what is my philosophy and how would I like to believe in this thing, or what beliefs would I like to have about this thing? Sometimes it's that philosophy and this desire for something to be within the parameters of what we would like the universe to be about that affects us. Sorry for the garbled explanation, but that, I think it's something to consider.
I guess you've studied a lot of different cryptid encounters, cases, and research. Is there a particular beast or cryptid that you would say is your favorite?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be lake monsters. I started as a lake monster guy, and I think I'll finish with this one as well. It's just so exciting, and I think it's something to do with the water. It's the depth of the water. It's this hidden aspect, this impenetrable space that we can't get into. I've been to Loch Ness a whole bunch of times, and many of the other lochs as well, and other lakes around Britain that have lake monster stories, and there's even loads of sea serpent stories, or what I would call in many cases itinerant lake monsters of the same type as Nessie, but around our coasts. It's just amazing. And as an island people, how we cannot be obsessed with the sea and the water in every single aspect of our lives. It surprises me. My wife always jokes that it seems that most people in Britain don't really get that they live on an island. We've got a sort of a mainland sort of feeling about us and ourselves, and yet there's coast everywhere. 50 miles from everywhere, there's coast almost.
Because that's I used to live right on the cusp of Lake Windermere.
Oh, I think they have a monster allegedly as well. Yeah, absolutely.
But
Bonus.
Bonessie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bonus.
there's a recent account that I believe you commented on as well for that account recently. Is that right?
The one I interviewed somebody about recently was actually one of the very early ones, and that was in 2006. I think it was one of the first ones. There was a photograph sighting made by a photographer, Lyndon Adams. He's a well known in the media. He's a great photographer, and he saw the creature for 15 minutes. And his photos, even though they're at distance, about a mile distant, they still show something really huge and long in the water, swimming about and cavorting. During that whole time, he, as a photographer, he did great work as well. He got the measurements of all of the buildings and bits of land in the background and sized the feather up so you could actually sensibly estimate the length of the creature in view. The part in view is 15 feet. There's nothing in the lake that can grow to that size. There's a great story there, actually, that one I didn't put in my book because I found out about it later. And there was a couple. There's these little sort of motorboats you can hire to go on Lake Windermere. You remember the ones with the little red sort of back, and you hire the boat and go out on the lake there. And there was a couple, and they went out on the lake, on just a regular day. It wasn't very busy. Weather was bad. Started to rain. So they all got under the canopy. And then suddenly, this huge, they said, thick, dark green eel-like creature, because of its length, swims up alongside them. They could have reached out of the boat and touched the creature and just kind of sidles alongside the boat for a few minutes and disappears. And they're terrified now. And just looking at that interview,
I would be.
I would be too. And I want to see something like this. But in the moment when you realize that's a real creature that has a real option to react independently, as a being to your presence, it's a frightening thing. And it was an amazing sighting to me. They saw it, the creature. It couldn't have been anything else. It couldn't have been a seal. Couldn't have been an eel. Something unknown just came across. And when you listen to the interview with them, they're clearly very rattled but shocked. And they've got no skin in the game. They're not interested in anything to do with cryptozoology or the paranormal. They're just two town girls that went out sailing with their boyfriends for an afternoon for a bit of fun, and saw a monster essentially, which is just awesome.
I've definitely got some other questions to ask you about water monsters, but we've got some interesting questions that come through from our viewers. Mazabert Bob asks, let's bring that up. Of all the unusual creatures you have researched, which do you think are the most populous in Britain?
Well, it's not exactly, and I'll answer Healing Heart's question in the same answer. Actually, so it's not a cryptid per se, but it's an out of place animal, which is the British big cats, and that's a phenomenon that, in my opinion, that's clearly been caused by the Dangerous Wild Animals Act that was introduced in 1976, which stipulated very stringently and in a very expensive way the kinds of enclosures and room and conditions under which exotic animals needed to be kept and registered. And many people, I mean, people who had farms with, maybe they had a pet puma or a melanistic leopard, the black panther, that were very popular at that time, many people just let them go. They couldn't afford to keep the animal. They didn't want to kill it or have it put down. And there were no zoos offering to take them off their hands. They had no option. They just let them go. And leopards and pumas, which are the most commonly sighted big cats in the UK, are fantastically well adapted to our environment. And what have we got? 30 million sheep, 5 million deer, 35 million rabbits in the country, and game birds, and so on and on and on and on and on. And the sightings are just too regular. We're clearly seeing their descendants, maybe the descendants of the descendants of the descendants, 46 years later. And it's amazing to me. I think there is now a homegrown population of big cats in the UK, and they're growing year upon year upon year. And because these animals have territorial needs, they're largely solitary, they just keep spreading out and out and out. I can't ratify this statistic because I was told it. I never checked it out actually, but I was told by a big cat researcher that on average 16,000 sheep are killed every year by dogs. So dog kills. People walking their dogs in the countryside, or their dogs get off the lead and go for a run and kill sheep, essentially, tear their throats out or whatever they do to them. And I really wonder, out of that, say, approximately 16,000 sheep that are killed by dogs, how many are killed by other animals, like big cats, and just attributed to dogs if the killing isn't witnessed. So I think there is it's a bit of a get out of jail free card, perhaps, but there is room within that number to support quite a large population of these animals. And besides that, I had a great sighting given to me by a farmer in Yorkshire. Don't know the location. He was out in his field baling hay, getting it ready for the winter for the horses in his tractor, and he said he saw a black panther, and he said it was about 3 feet long, but only about a foot and a half high. And he said it was a lot smaller than I expected a cat like that to be. Initially, I thought perhaps he's seen a serval or a savannah cat, but no, he said it was bulky, it was big, but it was a lot smaller than I expected. And some of the breeds are smaller. I also wondered if there was a chance that there could be, smaller offspring due to the environment or the conditions. I don't know how that would be affected. And yet he was convinced. He just called me up. Somebody said, I should talk to you about these creatures. It's native. It's a native black panther. It lives here. It was born here. It's part of our environment. And I think in 20 or 30 years, they'll be like gray squirrels. We'll never know, or our descendants will never know that they weren't here once upon a time. It'll just be a natural part of the environment.
Excellent. Well, that's a very, very awesome answer, and hopefully that answered not only Mazza McBob's question, but also Healing Heart and Daniel Godwin, who was also asking about can you point him in the direction of the best case video or photo of big cats being here in the UK? But I think you've solidly answered that with that response. So I guess I did have a question for you about your other book, The Beasts of the World. But it's very rare when I've come on board to the subject that you find somewhere where someone is talking about all the different areas, the multitude of wild men possibilities or theories, because usually people will sit in a very specific lane that they either believe in Yeti or they believe in Sasquatch or they but doing the research for that book, did you find yourself gravitating towards a particular area of the phenomena? Because I know I did, and I was quite surprised where it pulled me to.
Not particularly. I mean, the reason I started writing that as the first book in the series. So just to recap briefly, the Beasts of the World series, it's a 7-part series. Number 2 is on the way, and covering different types of cryptids in one category. So I thought, well, let's do hairy hominids first. I thought, but then I called it hairy humanoids because some of the types were a little bit vague. So I wanted to be as ambiguous as possible to fit them in. But what I found there was actually, you know what? This is not just my own idea. It's one that existed before. It's not just the man-ape type that we have in North America, like the Bigfoot, this 7 to 9 foot tall, large hominoid. It's bipedal. It has this similar footprint to humans, except it has that strange arch in the middle. They call the mid-tarsal ridge. That seems to show that the foot can sort of clasp onto the things. It's walking over, I would imagine, branches and things like that. It's not only that type that exists. In Europe and West Asia, there seems to be a wild man type, a caveman-like type, almost like a Neanderthal, or what we imagine a Neanderthal to look like. Still hair covered, still large, but 5 to 7 feet in height this time, and having this distinct head hair to the hair on its body. Sometimes even wearing, some rags and bits of clothing, and Oh, and again to the Yeti, which seems more like a relic ape, or the skunk ape, which seems to be a similar type. And then I found little feet. This Australia has a good example of the Junjidi, which is they call the little fella. The Yowie they call the big fella, and so on and so forth. Even upright monkey monsters I found, which seem to be a strange kind of creature, like a monkey, has a tail, but it's huge. It's 5 to 6 feet tall and really fierce, and it even goes on further than that. And I thought, well, these have got to be classified differently. If I report these as Bigfoot in every single area of the world, well, that's not exactly honest. We're looking at variations of a species, or at least of a type, perhaps in the way that, a polar bear and a black bear and a grizzly bear are all bears, and a panda, they're all bears. Anybody seeing one, if he was familiar with the other, could see that that's a bear. And yet, they are very different to one another, and in their behavior, in their requirements regarding habitat and diet, and in their behavior as well.
Yeah, I mean it's a long and exhaustive subject if you start really delving into it from a global perspective, and it is quite surprising how dynamically different those reports, those accounts, the behaviors, the size, the descriptions, how much they vary. It's quite surprising.
It really is, and I mean, I'm not to labor it too much. I know we've spoken a lot about hominoids, but it's even in the book. I chose a few examples from every category. I could have filled it. We could have done 1,000 pages. There's so many different types of examples within those categories. And I thought, well, it's got to stop somewhere. It's got to be readable. Nobody's going to want 1,000-page book on hominoids, hominids. Sorry, but it's just
I said to you that I had some other questions about sea monsters because I was going through some of your Beasts of Britain blog, and I came across, funny enough, a blog from an account in 2015 with a crocodile.
Oh, the Plymouth crocodile
off the coast of. Yes, I've got a picture to share. So that should be coming up on the screen now. So hopefully you guys at home can see this one. We'll come back to your questions in just a moment. I just got this one that I wanted to ask Andy whilst we're on the subject of sea monsters. So yeah, this was in 2015. And I thought it was interesting because just last month there was quite a lot of noise about an incident in Bradford.
Yes.
Since this one was something that you had commented on and featured, I just wondered whether you had looked into the incident in Bradford.
In Bempton, near Bempton. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I have, and I did post it. So I think that the creature observed in this particular case, the Plymouth crocodile, was definitely credible in some respects. It was observed and photographed by, thankfully, again, a university technician had a telephoto lens with him, so this is the reason the pictures are so good. And he saw it. He saw it appearing about the same length of a boat, seemed to be sort of pockmarked or have a ridgeback in some way. It was looking like a huge crocodile to him, but I think that's something he's pulling from his mental library. Doesn't look like a crocodile, but he couldn't really think of anything else to to put it in that to compare it to. Now he describes it, and everybody who saw it describes it moving against the current and circling around as well. So we're definitely looking at something that was animate in some way, whether it was real, whether it was mistaken identity or not. We're looking at an animate creature that was estimated at being 20 feet long, and also had a boat in the foreground to measure it against. So that's a very credible sighting, whatever it turned out to be. And there are lots of other sightings of sea monsters. I mean, it isn't really too far from there to get to the famous Morgower sighting of 1975 in Pendennis Point in Cornwall. We're in the same relative area. However, the recent Bempton sighting of the filmed sighting of crocodiles swimming in the sea off there, I think is a ruse. I think it's a ruse for a very good point. One, the footage is cut off after about 6 seconds. So you've got some huge crocodilian animals swimming in the sea just off Bempton, the Bempton Cliffs, and yet you film it for 6 seconds and then stop. This is an amazing creature you're seeing here for the first time. And I think the reason it stopped is for one of two reasons. Either one, they were filming whales of some kind, perhaps pilot whales or something else similar. Or two, and this is really my strong suspicion, they're rocks. What she's captured there are rocks. And you can see the texture, this bumpy texture. It's almost if the waves are breaking over. And it's only really the movement of the camera that makes it seem like the thing in the focus is moving itself. I don't think it's moving at all. I would love to get up there and get some footage of that area, see if I can spot those rocks again at the right time. I always believe everybody that gives me a sighting at face value, because I think that's the respectful thing to do. But I still do my due diligence, and I've been fooled on more than one occasion. And I think, yeah, it's just part of the joy of figuring out, what's real and what's not in this genre. But
That's why the research is important, though, right?
yeah, absolutely. But it's my heartfelt desire and hope that there are some animals out there to find, and I would like to be one of the lucky ones to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, just talking to you, I think here on the Vault, we've worked a lot with Daniel Godwin. He was with us earlier on, or might still be with us now. Let us know if you're still with us, Daniel. As I mentioned to you off air, Ben from the 401 Files, and
Oh yes, I love Ben.
we try and assign ourselves to with people that are very much of the ilk that say it as it is, don't dramatize it. If you found evidence that doesn't support it, share it.
Yeah,
It's always important to the onward process, and it makes it much more credible and believable. So when someone like
yeah,
yourself comes on a show like this and says something and says, well, I don't think there's much to that, like we were just talking about the
yeah.
Benton Cliff alligators or crocodiles, and but then when you say, no, I think there is a lot to this, then it carries a lot of weight, which is fantastic. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think in this genre, just as a one little soundbite before finishing, you've got to be genuine with your career, especially because if you fake it, you'll break it. So as soon as you fake it and people find out, that's it, you're out forever. Nobody will ever believe you
Yeah.
again. And in fact, I don't even believe I've got the right to believe it. It's just about the investigation and presenting the findings, and that's as far as my bid should go.
My next question that I had is there other areas of the paranormal or the mysterious that you have a keen interest in? And if there are, what stands out as your biggest keen interest?
My other really big interest is actually history. It's poignant key points in history that intersect with one another and have created in different parts of the world simultaneously, although apart from one another, created the world that we live in today. And I love that aspect of finding out, maybe that, you know, um, metalworking was created here at the same time as gunpowder was found over there. At the same time as these guys were building huts, those guys were building colosseums, and kind of seeing it as a Google Maps view of the world of events all at once. You're just looking at this plain chessboard of the world, and yet there's all these different, huge, poignant parts of history taking place all at once. I love that. I love history. I'm not really into the ghost thing per se, but I do enjoy it from a skeptical point of view. I like looking at the facts of especially when people are presenting scientific or at least theoretically plausible arguments for it. I used to love the whole pinhole camera explanation for rematerializing ghosts, those that walk a path, like the headless lady of this castle or the grey man of that castle that walk a certain route. And I think there was a theory that the environment, the building itself, was almost like a pinhole camera recording that scene when atmospheric conditions were viable, and then replaying it in the future every time those atmospheric conditions are present again. And that's why people were seeing these ghosts or these apparitions walking a certain route. It's not my theory, but I was always kind of enamored by that and thought, wow, wouldn't that be a great explanation for this thing?
So we've got two great questions that have come up. Just going to share Healing Hearts first, and then we'll get to Daniel's.
Yes.
Have you found any truth in the reports of giants from long ago?
In truth, I mean, most of those giant reports come from the Geoffrey of Monmouth book, written in the 12th century, which is it Richard of Britannia? I can't remember. Sorry, the name of the book now. I did have it on the tip of my tongue. It came up recently because there was reports of a giant sighting in Holcombe, in Norfolk, on the beach, and an anonymous witness had claimed to have seen a 15-foot tall giant watching him in the sand dunes when he went for a pee. And this made the papers later because a dog walker then found two very large, four-toed, crudely made footprints that were clearly being cut into the sand. I'm guessing by the anonymous witness, by the way, and that made the papers. So, and that brought up. I did a little article on it for the Daily Star, and that brought up the whole history of giants again. Of course, there's the giant Gog Magog, who was the giant who was allegedly the last of the race of giants of Albion. That's what this island used to be called. That was captured, and this is partially folklore now. It appears in Geoffrey of Monmouth's book in the 12th century by Brutus of Troy, one of the refugees from the destruction of Troy, who traveled across the ocean and found the British Isles and found a tribe of giants living there and destroyed them, taken over the island and kept one as a sort of a token, I suppose, who was eventually killed by one of his generals in a sort of a hand-to-hand battle.
Was that when did they depict that in the film with when they bring the big guy who looks a bit like Goliath to fight Brad Pitt?
Oh yeah, well no, yeah, exactly in a way. But I mean, there's
I don't know if they were leaning towards that in that.
Well, I think that's more to do with stories of giants all over the world from those times. So of course there was the sons of Anak in the Middle East. Anak in Hebrew means giant. So the Anakim would have been giants, at least giant in stature. Goliath and his brothers were all supposed to be 9-footers, and I suppose that's not really out of the realms of possibility if you look at Robert Wadlow, the young man who died young but who had gigantism and who died at 8 foot 11 inches tall when he was 19 years old. So there's always the possibility of it, I suppose. As to whether these were sort of supernatural things, I just think it was a genetic abnormality that affects people as much as dwarfism does from time to time. And in close-knit communities, that would have been common to almost every part of the world up until recent, more international times. The likelihood of that gigantism spreading down through generations would have been higher than they would be today.
It's a very interesting point that you make there that I've never really considered when people start talking about giants, but there have been people, very few and far between, but we know and we have evidence of a mutation of sorts that they've grown to, as you said, Robert. Was it Wadlow?
Wadlow or Wadlow, I think. Yeah. In the US, he was 8'11".
Yeah, interesting. Never really thought about that, making that comparison, because again, throughout any culture and history, there could have been, the odd mutation that's then supplied a lot of the myth around giants, right? So yeah, we were chatting off air before we came on tonight, and I was saying to Andy, he's now part of the Vault family. Anybody who comes on to the Vault sessions, it's obviously the door is always open and welcome, and we're going to really obviously extend that to Andy, and he can drop back and give us an update on how things are going with him. And you were mentioning that you've got a book, a new book coming up, hopefully that's going to be ready by, was it Christmas, by December?
I hope before Christmas. It's a Beast of the World Volume 2, Water Monsters. That's the next volume I'm dealing with, and I hope so. I'm really trying to get it done on time. It might be January, if not January sales, perhaps. But yeah, I would like it to be ready before Christmas. It's just looking a bit sort of tough at the moment. So yes, I will work really hard and try to get it done in time.
Well, you can always come back and give us an update and give the book a plug as well. And it would be great for me to, and I'm sure the guys here at the Vault will have plenty more questions now that we've got used to who Andy McGrath is, and so I'm sure they'll have more questions for you next time as well. But thank you everybody that's asked Andy questions this evening. Hope you've enjoyed chatting with Andy. I've absolutely adored having you here with us on the Vault.